So does anyone remember what happened in Daniel chapter 1? What happened in Daniel chapter 1? So the captivity, so the three youth were taken to Babylon, okay? And what happened to them there?
When they were training them to serve the king, they wanted to require them to eat some certain food, and they didn't want to eat that food.
So they forced them, or they told them they had to eat certain food, and they said, no, this is against our law to eat the food. And then they allowed them to eat only vegetables, and everything worked well for them, so they allowed them to continue to do that. They were in training for 3 years, and then after that, they were selected to be like officials, wise men in the kingdom, okay? Okay, then what happened in Daniel chapter 2? Nebuchadnezzar made
a dream.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. He had a dream, and in the dream he saw what?
The soldier with a golden, or it was a statue.
Statue.
A golden head and
silver chest, bronze belly and thighs, and legs of bronze and clay, and feet of clay and bronze. Okay. So, iron and clay. So it's gold head, silver chest, bronze belly, legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. And this represented different kingdoms that was going to come after Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel made known the meaning of this dream, and he was the only one that was able to do it. So he was promoted, and the three youth, his friends, were also promoted in the kingdom. And because he was the only one able to do this, and he was telling Nebuchadnezzar like the future, like what are the kingdoms that are going to come after your kingdom. Okay, so that's chapter 2. Then what happened in chapter 3?
The three youth refused to bow down to the golden image or the statue.
So good. So Nebuchadnezzar realized the statue that he saw in his vision. So he said, "Okay, I saw this statue. I'm going to make a statue." And he made the statue completely out of gold because the gold represented him, right? So it's like the gold in his dream represented him. But he said, instead of just the head, I'm going to make the whole statue gold because I want to be forever, you know. So Nebuchadnezzar did that, and he said everyone has to bow down to it. Daniel's friends refused to bow down, so he threw them in the fiery furnace. But the friends were saved because the Son of God, Christ, appeared to them in the fire, and he made it not harm them. And in the end, they were saved. And Nebuchadnezzar kind of, for the second time now, declared the power of God. First time after Daniel interpreted the dream. The second time now after he saved the three youth from the fire. Okay, then that was chapter 3. So chapter 4 was last week. Okay, what was chapter 4?
Nebuchadnezzar's accounts about another dream, and the he's got from another dream, and the dream meant that he if he doesn't recognize God for being recognize God for what he is, like the creator of everything, like, and the one who gives authority to whoever he wants, then Nebuchadnezzar might turn his heart to be like the heart of a beast.
Yeah, so Nebuchadnezzar saw a dream of a big tree, and that tree was like abundant and had fruit and leaves, and all the animals and the birds were like had their sustenance from the tree, and then the tree was cut down. Okay, and so this tree represented Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, and all of these birds and animals that were kind of taking shelter in the tree and eating from the tree represented his kingdom and his people. And the fact that the tree is cut down meant that God was going to remove the kingdom from him, and that God is saying, I have authority to give the kingdom and to take the kingdom from whomever I wish, and that you, Nebuchadnezzar, are not great because of yourself, but because I have given you this kingdom. And so Daniel explained this dream to him, and warning him, saying, maybe if you repent and you humble yourself before God, that these things won't happen to you. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't repent, and a year passed, and after the year passed, Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind. He became insane, and he wandered around outside as though he were an animal. And it says in the Bible that this lasted for 7 times. And some people interpret that 7 times to mean 7 years. So for this long period of time, he remained insane and lost his mind until he was restored again, and he humbled himself before God, and his kingdom was restored again to him. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 4. And this chapter 4 was actually written from the perspective of Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar is actually writing to all of his kingdom, explaining the glory of God and recounting the story that happened to him. So he wrote it after he had been restored to sanity again, and he's telling all the people, this is what God has done with me, and this is why we should worship him, and this is why he's powerful, and reflecting on all of that. Okay, so today we will move on to the next chapter, to chapter 5. So we start immediately, chapter 5, with a brand new king. It says what? Belshazzar, the king, made a feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. Okay? Who is Belshazzar?
The son of somebody.
He's the son of somebody. So when you first read it, you might assume that he is the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, but actually there's a big gap in time here from the previous chapter, and we see a lot of things have happened in between. So I'm going to go over from a historical perspective. Okay, what is it that's transpired so far from chapter 4 to chapter 5? Okay, so in chapter 4, by the end of the chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is still the king. He's been restored again to his kingdom. Okay, we don't know the exact date that chapter 4 was written, but we know that Nebuchadnezzar's reign ended in 562 BC. So he started in 605 BC, and he ended in 562 BC. After Nebuchadnezzar's reign came his son, okay, who reigned only for 2 years, okay? And his name, he's actually mentioned in the Bible, his name is Amel Marduk, or Evil Merodach is another name for it, okay? I think in the Bible it refers to him as Evil Merodach. Okay, he is the direct son of Nebuchadnezzar, okay? He released King Joachim. If you remember in the very first chapter when we were talking about all these different kings, one of the kings of Israel, who was king at the time of the captivity, was taken into captivity, okay? And his name was King Joachim. So Nebuchadnezzar's son, he released Joachim back again. So he was free to go. This was in the 37th year of the captivity. This is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 25. After this man, Evil Merodach, came another king. His name is Neriglissar. Okay? And he reigned for only 4 years. And he killed the previous king. He was the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? So the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, meaning he is the husband of his daughter, right? So Nebuchadnezzar's had a daughter. This man, Neriglissar, married her, and he killed his son, okay, who was the king. And he became king in his place, okay? Then came another king whose name was Labashi Marduk in 556 BC, and he was the son of Neriglissar. He also was killed. Then came another king whose name was Nabonidus, okay, and he reigned for a longer period of time. He reigned from 556 to 539 BC, and he was not a Chaldean, okay? He was not a Chaldean, meaning he wasn't Babylonian. But his son is Belshazzar. So you see all this sequence that happened, okay? So you had Nebuchadnezzar, Evil Merodach, Neriglissar, Labashi Marduk, Nabonidus, Belshazzar. All of that has happened between chapter 4 and chapter 5. Okay?
I think there was at one point one who wasn't royal, and he was one of a group that conspired to kill the one that was royal, that was just 9 months. So they killed him. So then
That's Nabonidus. Nabonidus is not royal because he was not even a Chaldean. Okay?
but then he adopted someone who had been like, and so like he went away to live somewhere. If it's true what I heard, and then the one that's actual royal, they like
So-
rolling together.
Yes, that's exactly right. Belshazzar who was the son of Nabonidus, his grandfather was Nebuchadnezzar. So Belshazzar became co-regent, or they were both kings at the same time. Remember how we said that before even Nebuchadnezzar, he was king at the same time as his father? Okay, so this man Belshazzar, he is royal because his grandfather is Nebuchadnezzar, but his father is not royal. His father, Nabonidus, he is not Babylonian. Okay, so he was king at the same time as Nabonidus. Okay, and this is where we are here. Okay, the name Belshazzar, okay, means Bel protect the king. Remember, what is Daniel's name in Babylonian? Belteshazzar, right? Belteshazzar and Belshazzar, which has very similar meaning. Okay. Later on in this chapter, it refers to Belshazzar as the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but this is not literally son. This means like descendant of, right? Because we see he's actually the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, and he did not immediately become king after Nebuchadnezzar. There's all these other kings that came in between. Okay. Historically, if you read in many sources outside of the Bible, they referred to Nabonidus as being the last king of Babylon, and there was no mention of Belshazzar. But if you read in some of the writings of Baruch is one of the deuterocanonical books, as well as Josephus, a historian, okay, you do find mention of him. And for the longest time, like we were talking about before, for the longest time, people who are very like Bible critics, they want to attack the Bible and try to prove that it's a fictional account and it's made up and it's not historically accurate. They said the whole book of Daniel is fiction, and this man Belshazzar, he doesn't exist, and there's no mention of him anywhere. But then they found these tablets that actually told this story and mentioned Belshazzar in it. Okay, and it proved that the biblical account was actually true. Okay. During the reign of Nabonidus, okay, so remember here, at this time that when reading in Daniel chapter 5, there's two kings. There's Nabonidus and there's Belshazzar. Okay? During the reign of Nabonidus, he traveled outside of the city for about 10 years for various reasons, various things that he was doing. And during that time, he appointed his son Belshazzar to be the co-regent with him. Okay? In the historical writings, we read about Nabonidus that his daughter was like a priestess, and she was devoted to like the god of the moon, and his mother was also a priestess to the temple of the sun, and this made Nabonidus neglect the matters of the kingdom because he spent most of his time outside dealing with things related to his daughter and to his mother, like priestly duties and things like that they were doing. Okay. So here, when we're reading about Belshazzar as being the king, this is the king who is in Babylon now. Okay. Whereas the other king, okay, who is his father, is outside of Babylon. This is why he's not mentioned. And this is why when it's speaking about him as the king, because he is the only relevant king right now in the story that we're about to read. 30 years have passed since the previous chapter. Okay, so that's how much time has passed. So here in this first verse, we'll read it again. Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. So they're having this big feast for all of these important people in the kingdom. Okay. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Okay, so this isn't like an act of blasphemy, right? Because he is taking the sacred vessels that they looted and pillaged from Jerusalem when they destroyed the temple. Do you remember what year they destroyed the temple? 586. Because again, the exile was 3 phases. The first phase was in 605 BC, the second phase in 597 BC, and the third one in 586 BC. And in 586, this is when they destroyed the temple. But actually, it it said that they took the vessels, I think, in the first one. So even though they didn't destroy the temple, but they took the vessels in the first exile, the first phase of the exile. So he's doing this and having this party with these vessels, okay? Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. So this was like a direct blasphemy against God. And actually, when you learn what are the historical circumstances that are happening at this moment, it's a very bizarre thing that he's doing. Okay, when you read these verses, it makes it sound like, it's in a time of rejoicing and strength of Babylon, and they're having a party. Actually, it wasn't the case at all. They were in the middle of a siege where the Assyrian Empire, which are the Medo-Persian Empire, is coming to attack them. And these Persians had already conquered so much of their land and so much of their kingdom that only Babylon was left. Okay, so this man, okay, Belshazzar, is having this party when they are literally surrounded by Persians around them. Okay, this is why actually we're going to read later in this chapter that on this very same night, the king is killed and his kingdom is taken from him. How is it that could have happened? It's not like everything was great and the Persians were far away and then suddenly in one night they're attacking him, right? It had already reached the point where the Persians were on the verge of destroying them, but Belshazzar was very arrogant and he believed that the walls of Babylon were going to protect them from the Persians and that there was nothing for them to fear, and he wanted to have this party, okay? There are different opinions as to why the king would have this party in this time, okay? The first theory was because he wanted to build confidence among his people not to be afraid, because the only people left loyal to him that hadn't been conquered were the people in Babylon within those city walls. So he wanted to make sure that they remained faithful, that they remained confident, that they're not going to turn against him, that he is still the king and that they are going to be safe and he is a leader and he's going to lead them out of this somehow, right? The city had high walls, they had plenty of food, and actually the Euphrates River ran through the city, so they had an abundant supply of water, okay? This was why they felt so powerful and that nothing could conquer. That's one theory as to why he's having this feast, kind of like to keep up an image of strength. Another theory of why he had the feast, okay, was because Nabonidus, remember his father, okay, who is not present in Babylon, he had just been defeated in battle, and so he's no longer the king. So this was like a coronation of him becoming like the full king. He's no longer a co-regent, no longer sharing the throne with his father, but it's like he is now the king and the only king of Babylon. That's another theory, okay? Another theory was there just happened to be an annual feast that was to be celebrated at that time, and it just so happened to be at that time, and that's why the original. I kind of doubt that one, because you wouldn't expect that to be the case when you're about to be conquered, okay? I kind of feel the first one is the most likely one. He's trying to give an image of strength to the people.
I have a theory based on that picture and interpretation that they're doing witchcraft. Like, because their parties, they would have orgies and stuff to invoke the gods to maybe get protection. Because they have that pentagram there in that picture.
Actually, that's the Star of David.
Which is the same thing, a pentagram.
But that's because they're using the vessels from the temple. So it's putting that symbol on there to show that these are the vessels that came from Jerusalem.
Yeah, but Star of David is something new. That's what the Star of Raphaim. That's not the Star of David is Israel's star. It's not based on the Bible.
This is just a picture.
I'm just saying I got inspiration for that from my theory, because I know they have orgies for the gods that they're either suicidal or they're hoping, well, this is an easy way to win by doing witchcraft.
They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Okay, so this was like a further blasphemy against God, because not only are they like taking these vessels from Jerusalem, but they're also praising all these other gods, of all these other things. Okay?
Yeah, which to them isn't witchcraft. To them that's just worship,
And so this was also like propaganda for the people. Like it's kind of showing our gods are powerful. Our gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone are powerful. So they are going to protect us from any kind of attacks from the outside. And again, propping up the idea that, they are going to be safe and everything's going to be fine. In the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Okay? So this hand just appears and starts writing. Okay? St. Jerome says, the hand which appeared in the same hour was to declare that what had happened was due to his blasphemy and not for any other reason. Like this handwriting was in response to the blasphemy that King Belshazzar is doing now by taking these vessels, like in direct attack against God, setting himself up directly against God. Like not only does he not believe in him, but he's desecrating his holy articles, things from the temple. So when the king saw this hand writing in the middle of this party, it says the king's countenance changed, and its thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened, and his knees knocked against each other. You can see the difference in the atmosphere and the attitude that happened from before this to after this. When they begin to see this and something frightening to them that they have no idea what is going on. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. So you notice again how he says that they're going to be the third ruler, because there's already two rulers, him and his father Nabonidus. Okay, so but here, because the king is so frightened, he's saying that there's going to be a reward, right, for anyone who can tell me what this means. There's going to be a reward. Essentially, you're going to be like the highest rank ever in the kingdom, and you're going to be given gold and like all this stuff. That's how frightened he was to try to understand what is it, this writing that he has seen. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled. His countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. Okay, so who is this queen? This queen is most likely not the wife of Belshazzar, because it said previously that his wives were already present at this party. Okay, but she is most likely the queen mother, so it's most likely his mother, the queen. Okay, or it could be like the wife of Nebuchadnezzar or the wife of Nabonidus, not directly his own wife. And so she's coming and bringing some kind of objective kind of suggestion or advice to him, and he's saying, don't trouble yourself. We can find out what this means. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God, and in the days of your father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods. Remember here when we said the word father, right, doesn't necessarily mean direct father, so it's actually his grandfather, right? In the days of your grandfather, this is when we read about primarily all the things that Daniel had done. Light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So you see her recounting her experience from everything that had happened in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather. Inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. One interesting thing here is she uses his Hebrew name, Daniel. Okay? Like this is the first time we hear people calling him by his Hebrew name, right? Instead of just calling him Belteshazzar. Okay? Up until this point, it had been 23 years since Nebuchadnezzar had died, and here it kind of sounds like Belshazzar was not very acquainted with Daniel and who he was. Like even though he was the head of all the wise men in the past, Belshazzar is not very aware of him, of who he is and what he's done in the past. At this point in time, Daniel is about 80 years old. So remember, in Daniel chapter 1, when we started this story, when Daniel was still a youth, he was about 15 years old. And now, 65 years later, here he is, an old man, living still in Babylon, and still being called upon to serve in some way and to use the special gifts that God had given him for the service of this corrupt government and pagan people. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the captives?" He continues to use his Hebrew name. "From Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not give the interpretation of the thing." This is like the same pattern that we've seen in the past. There's like some big supernatural event that happens. The king first turns to his trusted wise men. The wise men can't offer a solution or an answer. So then he calls upon Daniel, and Daniel is able to give an answer that nobody else can give. "And I have heard of you that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Now, in the later chapters, the remaining chapters of the book, we read about the prophecies of Daniel. And these are not chronological. So the prophecies of Daniel are prophecies that he's actually already prophesied by this point in his life. Okay? But in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel actually prophesies about the destruction of the Babylonian Empire at the hands of the Persians in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar. Right? So he has already prophesied that in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, the Babylonians are going to be overtaken by the Persians. So he is already familiar with this. He is already aware of this because he's already prophesied this, and it was already recorded, and we're going to read it in Daniel chapter 8. Okay? But here, these events are actually happening now. Okay? So the king has offered him all of these gifts and things. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation." So he's refused the gifts. He says, "I don't want any positions. I don't want anything, right? But I'm going to make known the interpretation." What is one of the reasons you think that he would say that?
It's meaningless. 'Cause
Yeah.
I think because of all what he has done, like even earlier in the years when, like 65 years ago, when he was interpreting the king's dream, the king did not insult God, and he did not do maybe he didn't believe, but he didn't use the vessels from Jerusalem like the way he did.
So certainly King Belshazzar is much more blasphemous than Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't believe in God, but he never directly attacked God. Whereas here, Belshazzar is directly attacking God, so Daniel's attitude toward him is different than Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, good. What else? You said something.
Like, it's pointless because he's doomed in a few hours. So, like, what's the point of any of these?
Yeah, he's not even gonna. Belshazzar is not even gonna be king soon, so he doesn't have any authority to give. So whatever gifts or anything that he gives to Daniel is pointless, is meaningless. Okay, when Nebuchadnezzar promoted him and offered him positions and things like that, he accepted it, right? But here from Belshazzar, he's not accepting anything that he has to get.
So if the Persians saw him dressed as a ruler, then they might kill him too.
Yeah, perhaps. O King, the Most High. So Daniel is talking now. O King, the Most High. God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory and honor. He's recounting now, right? In the past. So remember, Nebuchadnezzar died 23 years ago, and 30 years have passed since chapter 4. And Daniel has now been in the kingdom of Babylon for 65 years. Okay? So he's saying, Nebuchadnezzar, your father, God gave him a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. Right? That was like the whole lesson, the arc of the lesson that Nebuchadnezzar learned from really the beginning of when we read in the beginning of Daniel until the last chapter, is in the end, Nebuchadnezzar accepted and learned that God is the one who set him up to be king, and it wasn't by his own strength, his own power, his own ingenuity that he accomplished anything, but it was because God had put him up. So why do you think Daniel is saying this to Belshazzar?
As a warning?
Yeah, I mean, it's a warning, but time is up, right? So there's no more place for Belshazzar to do anything.
It just shows them like this is what it like your the way you reign led to, just like your father's example.
Well, but there was a difference between them.
Yeah.
Because God never destroyed Nebuchadnezzar, but here is now destroying Belshazzar.
Because he didn't humble himself.
He didn't humble himself, right? Like he is, and there's one important point he's about to say. But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the difference between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar? Because both of them were pagan kings. Both of them were, full of themselves and prideful. So what was the difference?
Nebuchadnezzar just learned from his own experience, but his son kind of had this, witnessed it in a way, or learned about it. So he should have known better.
Right, he should have known better. Nebuchadnezzar had more of an excuse because he was unfamiliar with God. He didn't know anything about him, right? And so he was learning about this on his own as he went on. But God gave this example to Belshazzar, now having known and seen what has happened with his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, so that people would not repeat his mistakes, right? So Belshazzar should have learned from what happened with Nebuchadnezzar and known that he could not, stand up in pride against God the way Nebuchadnezzar did and expect to get away with it. I mean, we see a horrible consequence that happened because of Nebuchadnezzar's pride, for him like losing his mind and turning into an animal and all of this, right? Something fearful, right? And Belshazzar, should have been afraid that something might happen to him if he continues along the route that he is. Okay, so why do you think? I mean, this is something we fall into. We see the consequences of a certain action, but we sometimes ignore it, or we believe that this isn't going to happen to us. Why do you think that is?
Maybe we want the instant gratification that we get out of doing certain sins.
So the sin is very attractive. So in the moment where we want to sin and we want to gain the joy of that sin, we disregard any possible consequences that might happen. Okay?
Maybe because his father was favored by God, like God lifted him up, and so then he also thinks he could also get away with stuff.
So maybe he took lightly the consequences, that, what, even if some consequence happens to me, then in the end, God is still going to forgive me and God is going to have mercy on me, so everything is going to be okay. So maybe we take sin lightly because we think that in the end, God is never going to really, leave me to the end. He's gonna always come and save me, regardless of my attitude, regardless of what I do. So I'm going to willfully sin, knowing and believing that God can do that. Okay. What else?
I think that God is on their side.
They're gods?
They think that God
You-
because he's been protecting them. Maybe because he led them. He got on their side versus the Jews' side.
So you're talking about God, the God of Israel,
Yeah,
is on their side
Yeah.
because he allowed them to destroy Israel.
yeah.
Okay.
So they feel they're like they've got special
Okay, so
privileges.
again, like trying to like make that kind of apply to us, maybe because we feel that God gives us good things. I think we mentioned this last time too. Because God gives us good things, that means God must be approving of what I'm doing, and God is going to never give me any consequence or judge me or rebuke me about anything, because God has given me so many good things, and so I continue in my path that I know is wrong. Okay. What else?
Could be out of weakness.
Okay. What do you mean?
I mean, we all do sins, and we still like, do things that we know are wrong, but it's out of weakness.
That's true, but that doesn't necessarily explain the pride aspect, right? Like weakness explains why we sin. But here, Belshazzar wasn't just sinning, but he was directly rebelling against God and challenging him, right? Which is different than just weakness. Because someone can be weak and fall into all kinds of sin, but then they repent. Like King David. King David was weak and he fell into bad sins, very bad. But then he repented. So he didn't have that obstinate, stubborn spirit that when he was confronted, he didn't, he didn't fight it. He accepted it and he humbled himself. Another reason sometimes we, we stand up against God and we continue in kind of a life of sin is because we think that we are more clever than God. We think that we can get away with it because we, are smart, and we think that we are powerful and we can do things and God can't reach us. Like a good example of this is what? Something that happened after after the flood.
Yeah, they got drunk because they're drunk. I was thinking, like you said, like last week about how a country will get soft when and it'll get powerful. Well, they've had all this power. They gotten too comfortable partying, and now they're not thinking straight.
So certainly that's the case too. Like we're not thinking straight because we're always indulging in sin. Okay, but there's something specific I'm referring to after the flood. What was the major event that happened after the flood?
No one getting drunk.
No, after that.
The son got together with the mother.
The Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel. Okay, why?
Oh, because they wanted to go up and fight God.
Why were they building a tall tower?
To make a name for themselves.
To make a name for themselves, and there was another reason. To reach God, and to do what?
To go challenge him.
Yes.
Oh, to keep the people together, like a concentration, like concentrated in one place.
Okay. Yes.
They wanted to knock God down.
Okay.
Avoid a flood.
Avoid a flood. Why? Because
they didn't believe him. He said he wouldn't do it again.
He said he wouldn't do it again, but they said, okay, if God does it again, well, now we have an escape route. We can climb the tower, and we're going to be far away from the water and be safe. So they believed that they could outsmart God. If God ever tried this again, we now have a way to outsmart him. Okay, and that's a way we also do. Like we think that we always have a way. Like if God tries to, if he tries to hem me in on one side, I can always like have an escape route and go over here, trying to find ways to avoid, humbling ourselves and doing what God wants. So he continues, Daniel speaking to Belshazzar, and says, "And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified." He's saying the gods that you are worshiping are ignorant, and they don't talk, and they can't listen, and they don't act, and they don't do anything. But the God who holds your breath in his hand, when you try to meditate on that, hold your breath in his hand. Like we take breathing maybe for granted that we can breathe, okay? It's like every single breath that we take, God is allowing, and he continues to allow all the time, right? And so this very living God, who is very active and must actively sustain our lives, You have ignored him, and you have not glorified him, but instead you have set yourself up against him, and there is a consequence to this. Okay, so again, you see Daniel's attitude toward Belshazzar is different than Nebuchadnezzar. When Daniel found out about the bad things that was going to happen to Nebuchadnezzar, what did he say to him?
To repent.
What was his reaction? Was he happy?
No.
Did he rebuke him?
Yes.
He didn't rebuke him.
No.
Did not rebuke Nebuchadnezzar. What did he say? When Nebuchadnezzar told him the vision that he saw about the tree getting cut down, what did Daniel say to him? He said, "Let this concern your enemies and not you." Right? He's like God forbid that this be about you. Let it be about your enemies. Let it be about somebody else. Like he spoke to Nebuchadnezzar with such respect, right? Mm-hmm. He never directly confronted Nebuchadnezzar. He never told him, "You are evil man, and that you do this and you do this." But here, when it comes time for Belshazzar, okay, because of his direct rebellion against God and direct hatred toward God, remember, Nebuchadnezzar did not hate God. Nebuchadnezzar actually declared that God was powerful from the very beginning of the book, right? But he didn't worship him as the only God, right? He didn't worship him as the only God. But every time he saw God do some miracle, he respected God for that. Here, Belshazzar is directly attacking God, taking God's holy vessels and using them for parties and stuff. So he is full of pride. Now, especially even having known what has happened with Nebuchadnezzar. Knowing everything that's happened in the past should make him all the more humble, and he has no excuse to be this way because he knows the past, the history of what's happened. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written. Mean, tekel, upharsin. Okay, these are the words. Okay, what language is this in?
Chaldean?
No, because if it was in Chaldean, they could read it.
God's language.
No. No. Aramaic. This is actually written in Aramaic. So this isn't some kind of cryptic, heavenly language that nobody can read. Okay? But they actually spoke Aramaic. They could understand Aramaic. Okay, actually earlier we spoke about how people were communicating in Aramaic. So it's possible that they could read the words, but they didn't understand what it meant. Okay, because what does it mean? The word mean or meanie, right? It means numbered. Tekel means weighed, and upharsin means divided. So if you just see a message kind of appear in the room that says numbered, weighed, divided, you don't know really what that means, right? It's kind of obscure. So even though we could read the words themselves, the message is unclear. What does this message mean? And of course, what got his attention wasn't the content of the message, it was the miraculous way that it appeared with a hand writing on the wall and doing all that, right? So that's, obviously he's very concerned, and even if they could read what these individual words meant, it didn't make any sense to them. Okay, what is the message? So he goes on and he says, "This is the interpretation of each word. Meaning, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it." Okay, remember that word means numbered. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Okay, Perez, okay, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Okay, yes, Perez is another way of expressing that, a parson. So that was the meaning behind it. Okay, God has numbered your kingdom. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Okay. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed, and this is kind of the ridiculous part. He gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. So he's not really understanding the gravity or the kind of the urgency of what is it that's just happened, right? I mean, you can imagine that if you're in a city that was, surrounded by the Persians. Remember, for some of you that weren't here at the beginning, at this point in time, the entire city of Babylon is surrounded by Persians, right? Not that the Persians are on the border of Babylon trying to attack them, but literally they have conquered all of the kingdom of Babylon except for the city of Babylon itself, the capital city, right? So they are surrounded by these Assyrians, and yet in their pride, they think that their city is so strong that no one is ever going to be able to attack them. No one is ever going to be able to encroach on their land, on their city, and so on. So they're here having this party and they're doing all of this when, it's really foolish for them to be doing so. But the king, still thinking that they're so secure that nothing is going to happen to them, he's still going on with everything as normal. Okay, you're going to become the third ruler in the kingdom, and I'm going to dress you in purple and do all this stuff, because he's really not taking to heart this message. Now that I have learned what this message means, you don't see repentance here. You don't see him changing. You don't see anything showing of fear or showing of, like acknowledging this message or anything like that. Next verse. That very night, Belshazzar, king of Chaldeans, was slain. Right? Because again, the Assyrians were on the border, or not on the border, right, surrounding the city, and they were able to kill him. Okay? And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Okay. So, who is Darius the Mede? Because there's a lot of controversy about him. So this day, based on historical documents, historical Babylonian documents, this day was October 12th, 539 BC. Okay, so we know that Babylon fell to the Persians October 12th, 539 BC. Also, based on these documents, we know how thick the walls were, because this is why they were so, they felt so secure in Babylon. The walls were 87 feet wide. I think 87-foot wide wall. That's how thick the walls were. And the walls were 350 feet tall. This is why they thought there is no way that anyone could ever attack us. Imagine trying to go through an 87-foot wide wall. And it had 250 towers, which go up as high as 100 feet. Okay? During the attack, this is what the Persians did. During the attack, the Persians diverted the water supply coming from the Euphrates. Remember, we said the Euphrates River passed through the city, which is why they were never worried about running out of water. Okay, because the water actually passed through the city. So they diverted the water of the Euphrates River so it could no longer serve as a moat. Like the water was going around the city like a moat. You know what a moat is?
Mm-hmm.
A moat is like when you have water going around like a walled-in city or castle, to where you actually have to cross the water in order to enter the city. Okay, so that was one more obstacle to prevent them from getting close to the city to attack it. So they diverted this river, the Euphrates River, so that the moat around the city dried up, so they can actually go and attack it. Okay. Also, there is a story that is related to us by a pagan historian whose name was Xenophon. Okay. He speaks that there were two leaders of Belshazzar. One's name was Godatus, and the other's name was Gobrias, that actually betrayed Belshazzar and defected to the Persians. Okay, and these two leaders helped the Persians to know how is it that they can attack the city, like what are the vulnerabilities of the city. And I remember reading one of them, I think either Godatus or Gobrias. Belshazzar was responsible, I think, for killing one of their sons. So they had like a grudge against Belshazzar, which is what helped prompt them to defect to the Persians. Okay, this is kind of some of the details of how the Assyrians actually did this. Okay, there's also a controversy over the identity of this person, Darius. Okay, Darius the Mede. Some people say that he is the same person as Cyrus. Cyrus was prophesied by Isaiah the prophet 100 years earlier, before Cyrus even was a person. He prophesied Cyrus by name is going to be the king that returns the Jews back to Israel. Right? Remember, how long was the captivity in Israel, in Babylon? How many years? 70 years. So they stayed there 70 years. And why was it just 70 years? Because King Cyrus at the time, he returned. He told the people to return, that they were allowed to return if they wanted. Okay? And Isaiah prophesied about King Cyrus before King Cyrus was even king. And he prophesied by name, that his name is going to be Cyrus. Some people say that Darius is Cyrus. Other people say that Darius is the name of like a title. it's not the name of a person, but it's a title. Kind of like you have Pharaoh or Caesar. It's not the name of a person, but it's a title. You can have many different people be Pharaoh, many different people be Caesar. Some people say Darius is like another name for like the title of a king. Okay. So in this case, people that say that it's just the title, they believe that he was in history a man named Cyaxares II. Okay. And he is also the uncle of Cyrus the Great, who was later to become king after him. So here we read about Darius, okay, and in this next chapter, Darius is going to be the king. Later, Cyrus is going to become the king. Again, he will be king at the time when he returns everybody back to Israel. Okay. Any questions about this chapter? Okay.
But does the Bible say that like Darius is the one that's gonna return them, or does it not mention at all? Because if you're saying that they say that Darius is Cyrus, then I think the Bible must clarify it if the Bible mentions who is it that returned the people. See what I'm saying?
Not necessarily. I mean, you have some, to the people living at the time, these were like interchangeable words. People understood, right? Like people understood like that when you say Caesar, for instance, you're talking about a title. There's different Caesars. Or if Darius is in fact a title, people would understand. So there's no kind of necessity of being consistent in the way that you refer to people. You know what I mean? Any other question? Okay. Glory be to God forever. Amen.